Picture a house full of women and a small boy who has learned to be very quiet. Roken, Prussia, 1849. Friedrich is 4 years old. His father, Karl Ludwig, a Lutheran pastor, a gentle man by all accounts, a man who loved music and believed in God with the uncomplicated faith of someone who has never had reason to doubt, has just gone mad. Something happened to his brain. The doctors cannot explain it. He screams sometimes. He does not recognize his son. Within a year he is dead. The boy watches them carry the coffin out of the parsonage. He is 5 years old. He does not cry, at least not where anyone can see. He files this information away somewhere very deep. The people you love most can simply stop being themselves while their body continues. The mind is not as solid as it appears. Everything you build your life on can be taken without warning and without reason. 6 months later, his baby brother dies. 2 losses before the age of 6. No explanation, no justice, no pattern. He grows up in the parsonage, surrounded by his mother, his sister Elizabeth, his grandmother, 2 aunts. The women are kind, the house is orderly, God is present in every room, in the grace before meals, in the Sunday sermons, in the moral certainty that suffering has a purpose, and that the dead are with the Lord. Friedrich learns this language fluently. He is a gifted student. He memorizes scripture. He writes his first autobiography at 9 years old, 3 pages long, already trying to make sense of his own life through writing. But something is already wrong or already different, depending on how you look at it. He has headaches, severe ones from childhood, the kind that put you in a dark room for days, the kind that make light feel like a physical assault. The doctors will spend the next 40 years failing to understand what is happening inside his skull. What we know now is that his nervous system was running too hot, too fast, generating too much. The price of the engine he was born with. He is also from very early watching everything from a slight distance. Not cold, not unfeeling, but observing. The other boys play. Friedrich plays too. But he is also watching the playing. He is already aware of the gap between what people say they believe and how they actually behave, between the Sunday sermon and the Monday morning, between the language of faith and the face of his father in the final months, when the man who had spoken so confidently of God's love could not recognize his own child. He does not name this gap yet. He is 9, then 12, then 15. But the gap is there, filed away, accumulating. He goes to Schulpforta at 14, the finest boarding school in Prussia, on a scholarship. He is exceptional. Everyone agrees on this. Latin, Greek music. He composes pieces that his teachers find unsettling in their ambition. He reads everything. He writes essays that are too long and too certain for a boy his age. He is elected to lead a small literary society called Germania, where he and 2 friends agree to share 1 creative work per month. He takes this more seriously than the friends intended. He is, at this point, entirely conventional in his beliefs. He wants to become a pastor like his father. He wants to serve God. He wants the framework his father had before the framework broke. He does not know yet that he is going to spend his entire life trying to understand what happens to a human being when the framework breaks. He does not know that this is not merely his personal question, but the question of the entire century he is living in. He knows only that his father is dead, that God did not prevent this, that the house is quiet and orderly and full of faith, and that somewhere underneath the faith, underneath the order, there is a question that nobody in the house is asking. He is 5 years old. He is already asking it. He finds the book in a second-hand shop in Leipzig. He is 21 years old, a doctoral student in classical philology, the study of ancient Greek and Latin texts, the careful scholarly reconstruction of a world that ended 2,000 years ago. He is supposed to be becoming a professor. He is supposed to be producing footnoted analyses of pre-Socratic meter and the textual variants in Theognis. He is good at this. He is, by every measure available to the university, excellent at this. His supervisors speak of him with the particular warmth that academics reserve for students who make them feel their field matters. He picks up a copy of Arthur Schopenhauer's The World as Will and Representation, almost by accident. The spine, maybe, the title, some pull he cannot account for. The book had been published in 1818 and had spent 40 years in near-total obscurity before slowly, almost against the will of the culture that had ignored it, finding its readers. The man who wrote it had died 8 years earlier, alone in Frankfurt, convinced to the end that the world had failed to understand him. He had been right about the world and right about the failure, and he had not lived to see either judgment reversed. Friedrich takes the book back to his rooms and begins reading. He does not stop for 2 weeks. He will write about this later, trying to describe what happened, and the language he reaches for is not the language of intellectual discovery, it is the language of recognition, as if someone had written the book specifically for him, not as flattery, not as coincidence, as the precise experience of reading words that name something you have been carrying without language, something that has been living in you unnamed and therefore unexamined, pressing against the inside of your chest for years. And then suddenly there is the word, and the word fits, and the relief is physical. What Schopenhauer gave him was a framework for the gap he had been filing away since his father's coffin, since the baby brother 6 months later, since the long years in the parsonage where God was present in every room, and suffering was present in every room, and nobody connected these two facts into a question worth asking. Schopenhauer said, "The world is not rational. It is not progressing toward anything. It is not being guided by a benevolent intelligence toward a meaningful end. Underneath everything, underneath every human desire, and every natural process and every apparent purpose, there is will, blind, purposeless, insatiable will, driving everything forward without destination, producing suffering not as an accident, not as a deviation from the plan, but as the inevitable consequence of what it is. The suffering is structural. It is what existence produces when consciousness becomes aware enough to notice the gap between what it wants and what the world offers." Friedrich reads this and feels something he will spend years trying to understand. Not despair, not the darkness you might expect from a young man being told that the universe is indifferent and suffering is inevitable. Something stranger than despair, something closer to relief. The specific relief of a diagnosis after years of unexplained symptoms. The relief of someone who has felt the ground shifting underfoot for as long as they can remember and has been told, yes, you were right, it is shifting. You were not imagining it. The house is built on sand and you were the only one honest enough to feel it. He also feels, immediately, and with a force he cannot yet explain, that Schopenhauer is not quite right. The diagnosis he accepts completely, the prescription he cannot accept at all. Schopenhauer's answer to the blind suffering-producing will was resignation, aesthetic contemplation, the slow quieting of desire, the Buddhist stillness he pointed toward as the only real exit from the pendulum. Want less, need less, let the will exhaust itself against your deliberate withdrawal from its demands. This is the path of the saint, the ascetic, the person who has understood the structure of suffering and responded by systematically dismantling their own attachment to the things that suffering uses as its instruments. Something in Friedrich resists this with a physical force. He does not have the counter-argument yet. He is 21 and he has just read the most honest account of suffering he has ever encountered, and his response is not, yes, I will want less. His response is something more like, no. Something is wrong with this answer. The diagnosis is right and the prescription is wrong, and I do not yet know why, but I know it in the same way I know the headaches are real. In the body, before the understanding catches up, he files this away. He has been filing things away his entire life. The gap, the question nobody in the parsonage was asking, the distance between what people say they believe and how they actually move through the world. Now this, Schopenhauer is right about the problem and wrong about the solution, and I do not yet know what the right solution is. He is 21 years old, and he has just found the question that will consume the next 20 years of his life. Then he meets Wagner. It is November 1868, a drawing room in Leipzig, and someone is about to play piano transcriptions from Die Meistersinger. Richard Wagner is in the room. Friedrich does not know this yet. He hears someone at the piano playing with a precision and an authority that is different in kind from ordinary competence, the way certain people hold an instrument as though the instrument belongs to them rather than the other way around. And then a voice, a large voice filling the room without effort, commenting on the music as it plays, opinionated, certain, slightly performing, even in private conversation. Friedrich turns. Wagner is 53. He is not physically imposing. Medium height, large head, eyes that seem to be always slightly ahead of the conversation, already thinking about what comes after whatever is currently happening. He shakes Friedrich's hand and immediately begins talking about Schopenhauer. This is the moment, not the handshake, the Schopenhauer, because here's a man who has read the same book, felt the same recognition, and responded not with resignation but with creation. Wagner had read the world as will and representation and decided that music was the answer. That art, specifically his art, specifically the kind of total artwork he was devoting his life to building, could do what religion no longer could gather people into something larger than themselves, could make them feel the full weight of existence and bear it without lies and without false consolation, could be, in a world where God was dying, the thing that replaced God. Not by pretending the suffering wasn't real, by making it beautiful, by giving it form, by saying, yes, this is what existence is, and look, inside this form it is bearable, it is even magnificent. Friedrich listens and feels something he has never felt before. Belonging, the specific physical sensation of being in the right place, of having found the person who is working on the same problem from the other direction. A few months later, he visits Wagner's house at Tribschen on the lake outside Lucerne. He will come back here again and again over the next years, and each time the house will feel like the same thing, arrival. The light on Lake Lucerne in the morning is particular. It does something to the mountains on the far shore, flattens them slightly, makes them look like a backdrop someone has painted rather than actual geology, and then the light shifts and they become real and overwhelming again. The house sits above the water. There is always music coming from somewhere inside it, Wagner working at the piano, or Cosima at her desk, or one of the children practicing. The smell of tobacco and coffee and wood smoke, Cosima herself, tall, composed, managing an entire world with the quiet authority of someone who has decided that Wagner's genius is the most important thing in the room and has organized everything else around this decision. Friedrich arrives and the house receives him. That is the only way to describe it. He is 23 years old, nearly blind in one eye, the headaches coming more frequently now. His academic career already beginning to feel like a mistake, and he walks into this house on the lake, and it receives him. He and Wagner talk for hours about Schopenhauer, about Greek tragedy, about what art can do that philosophy cannot, about the festival theatre Wagner is planning to build at Bayreuth, where the total artwork will finally be performed under the right conditions for the right audience, with the full force of everything he has been building toward. Wagner reads Friedrich's ideas and takes them seriously in a way the university never has. He tells him he is the only real understanding person he has met. He tells him this is the ally he has been waiting for. Friedrich believes him. He has no reason not to. He is young and lonely, and here is the greatest artist alive, telling him that his thinking matters, that the question he has been carrying since the parsonage has found its partner, that together they are working on something that will change how human beings understand what art is for. His first book, The Birth of Tragedy, published in 1872, is the direct product of these conversations. It argues that Greek tragedy achieved something no subsequent art form has managed, a perfect fusion of what Friedrich calls the Apollonian and the Dionysian. Apollo is the god of form, of order, of the beautiful dream, of the principle that makes individual things distinct and clear and contemplatable. Dionysus is the god of ecstasy and dissolution and the overwhelming forces that precede all form and will eventually swallow it. Greek tragedy held both simultaneously. It looked directly at suffering and death, and the indifference of the cosmos, and it put this vision inside a form so precisely crafted that the looking became endurable, even exhilarating. The audience did not leave the theatre consoled. They left shattered and somehow more alive than when they arrived. They had been told the truth about existence, and the telling had been beautiful, and the beauty had made the truth bearable. Friedrich argues that this is what Wagner is attempting to do again, that Bayreuth is where it will happen. The classicists destroy the book. His colleagues, the people whose approval he had spent his entire academic career earning, declare it a disgrace. One prominent philologist named Ulrich von Wilhelmowitz-Mullendorf publishes a pamphlet so savage it reads less like scholarly criticism than like a public execution. Not classical scholarship, he writes. Myth-making, fantasy. The work of someone who has abandoned the standards of the discipline entirely. Students stop attending Friedrich's lectures at Basel. The university does not fire him, which would have been a cleaner end. It simply moves around him. His colleagues stop citing him. The invitations dry up. The career that was supposed to unfold, the professorships, the editions, the footnotes accumulating into a reputation, quietly closes. He had staked everything on two things: Schopenhauer's diagnosis, Wagner's answer. He had written the bet down and published it and signed his name. He is 30 years old. He is already losing his eyesight. The headaches are now arriving for days at a time. He takes long walks alone in the mountains near Basel because the altitude and the cold air are the only things that reliably interrupt the pain. And he is starting, slowly, reluctantly, to see something about Wagner that the belonging had prevented him from seeing before. The festival at Bayreuth finally opens in August 1876. This is the moment everything has been building toward. The total artwork, performed as intended, in the theatre built specifically for it, for an audience that has come from across Europe. To witness what Wagner has promised will be a transformation of German culture. Friedrich attends. He sits in the darkened theatre. Wagner has designed so that the audience cannot see each other, can only see the stage, so that nothing interrupts the dream. He watches the ring cycle begin, and he watches the audience. On the third day, he sees it. A man in the row ahead of him, heavy-set, prosperous, wearing the expression of someone receiving confirmation rather than confrontation, not being shattered by what he is seeing, being validated by it. Behind him, a woman in silk, dabbing her eyes at precisely the moment the music tells her to. Around him, the German bourgeoisie, the nationalists, the journalists, the patrons, people who have come not to have their understanding of the world broken open, but to have it celebrated, to feel, for 4 days in a Bavarian theatre, that their particular version of who the Germans are and what Germany means is the version that even the gods endorse. The music is magnificent. Friedrich knows this. He has always known this, but the music is being used. He watches Wagner take his bow. The crowd erupts. Wagner stands at the front of the stage and receives it, the adulation, the proof that the total artwork has worked. And his face in that moment is not the face of someone who has succeeded in showing an audience the honest terror of existence. It is the face of someone who has given an audience exactly what they wanted and is pleased that it worked. Friedrich leaves before the final performance. He takes a train to a spa town nearby and lies in a darkened room with a cold cloth over his eyes and tries to understand what he has just seen. He has spent 8 years believing that Wagner was the answer to Schopenhauer, the artistic vision that could do what the philosophical resignation could not, the Dionysian truth inside the Apollonian form, the thing that could make existence bearable without lying about it. What he saw at Bayreuth was not that. What he saw was a very powerful man giving a very large audience permission to feel good about themselves, wrapping their existing prejudices, their nationalism, their need for myths that confirm their own importance in music so overwhelming that the wrapping felt like revelation. He does not go back to Tribschen. Cosima writes, he does not respond immediately. Then he responds briefly. The letters become shorter and less frequent, and then they stop. He has Schopenhauer's diagnosis. He no longer believes in Wagner's cure. He is 31 years old, nearly blind. his academic career effectively over. The friendship that had been the closest thing to home he had found since the parsonage, gone, and he is, for the first time, entirely alone with the question. Not the question of what art can do, not the question of what Schopenhauer missed. The older question, the one from the parsonage, the one a 5-year-old boy filed away when they carried his father's coffin out the door. What do you do when the framework breaks? Not as a philosophical problem, as a life, as the actual situation you find yourself in, standing in a train station in Bavaria with a headache that has lasted 4 days, no academic position worth keeping, no great friendship to return to, and a question so large it has no edges. What do you build, and how do you build it when everything you tried to build on has given way? He does not know yet, but he is, for the first time, asking it without anyone else's answer already in his hand. That is the beginning of the philosophy, not the books, not the aphorisms, not the famous proclamations that will get him misread for the next 150 years. This moment, a train platform, a headache, the belonging gone. The question finally, fully his own. There is a particular kind of loneliness that only arrives after belonging. Not the ordinary loneliness of someone who has never found their people, never found the room where the conversation is happening at the level they need it to happen. That loneliness is painful, but it has a direction. It points towards something. It says, keep looking. It exists somewhere. You have not found it yet. The loneliness that arrives after belonging is different in kind. It does not point toward anything. It says, you had it and now it is gone and you know exactly what is missing, because you have felt it, and the knowing makes the absence worse, not better. Friedrich knows both kinds now. He spent his childhood with the first, he spent 8 years at Tribschen with the second waiting to happen, and now in his early 30s, in rented rooms in Basel and Sorrento and Genoa and Nice and Sils Maria, moving because the headaches respond slightly better to certain altitudes, certain climates, certain angles of light, he lives inside the second kind completely. He writes anyway. This is the first thing to understand about what happens after Bayreuth. He does not stop. He does not retreat into bitterness or silence. Something in him, the same thing that resisted Schopenhauer's resignation when he was 21, resists the easier response now. He writes with an urgency that increases as his health decreases, as though the body's failing is clarifying something, burning away everything that isn't essential, leaving only the questions that actually matter. But the writing changes. The birth of tragedy had been written in the register of the believer. Long sentences, full of Wagner's influence, full of the confidence of someone who has found the answer and is explaining it. The books that come after Bayreuth are written in a different register entirely. Shorter, more compressed, aphorisms, single paragraphs that land like thrown stones. The style itself is the argument. There are no systems here, no grand architectures, no total artwork of philosophy that will resolve everything into a final harmony. There is only the individual thought, tested against experience, offered without the comfort of a surrounding framework. Human All Too Human, published in 1878, is the first of these. He sends a copy to Wagner. Wagner does not respond. Cosima writes a brief cold note. The book is dedicated to the memory of Voltaire, the great French skeptic, the enemy of everything romantic, everything Wagner stood for. The dedication is not accidental. It is a goodbye written in the language of philosophy, addressed to someone who will understand exactly what it means. The break is now public. The Wagnerians close ranks. They decide that Friedrich has betrayed the cause, has been corrupted by some weakness or resentment, has failed the test that Bayreuth represented. They are not entirely wrong that something has changed in him. They are entirely wrong about what it is. What has changed is not that he has grown weaker or more resentful. What has changed is that he has grown honest enough to follow the argument wherever it goes, even when it goes somewhere that costs him the last belonging he had. To understand what he is doing in these years, the wandering years, the years of rented rooms and failing eyesight and books written in conditions that would have stopped most people entirely, you have to understand what he is actually working on, which is not a system. not a replacement for Christianity or a sequel to Schopenhauer or a philosophical foundation for Wagner's art. He is working on something harder and more personal than any of those things. He is trying to understand what happens inside a human being when everything they were taught to believe turns out to be built on a lie. Not a simple lie, not the lie of a hypocrite or a fraud, the structural lie, the lie that an entire civilization has been living for so long that it no longer knows it is lying. The lie that says, there is a framework, there is a moral order, there is a God who guarantees that suffering has a purpose and goodness will be rewarded, and the universe is underneath everything on the side of the good. He had felt this lie from the parsonage. He had named it philosophically through Schopenhauer. He had tried to answer it through Wagner. Now he has to face it without the answer. And what he finds, staring at it directly in the rented rooms and on the mountain walks, and in the notebooks he fills with increasingly compressed, increasingly urgent thinking, is something that terrifies him and exhilarates him in equal measure. The lie is not just wrong. It is the source of a specific kind of damage, a specific kind of human diminishment that he will spend the rest of his working life trying to name and trace and understand. The damage works like this. When you tell a person from birth that their natural drives and instincts and desires are dangerous, are sinful, are the enemy of the good life, what you are doing is not protecting them from themselves. What you are doing is creating a war inside them, a war between what they actually are and what they have been told they should be. And this war does not produce virtue. It produces resentment. It produces the specific psychological poison of a creature that has been taught to hate the most vital parts of itself. He watches this in the people around him, in the scholars who have spent their lives subordinating their actual thinking to the requirements of the discipline, in the religious believers who have been so thoroughly trained to distrust their own instincts that they can no longer tell the difference between genuine moral feeling and inherited moral performance, in the nationalists at Bayreuth who needed Wagner's art to confirm what they already believed, because genuine confrontation with the unfamiliar had become too threatening. In himself, if he is honest in the years when he needed Wagner's friendship so badly that he looked past what he was seeing, the question that emerges from all this watching is the question that will structure everything he writes from here until the breakdown. Not, is God real? That question is already answered. Not, what should replace Christianity? That question assumes a replacement is available off the shelf. The real question is, what does it do to a human being to live without the framework? Not as a philosophical position, as an actual life. What does it feel like from the inside? What are the dangers? What are the possibilities? And is there a way to live in that openness that is neither the despair of the person who has lost everything, nor the bad faith of the person who has replaced one set of comfortable lies with another? This is what he is building toward. This is what the wandering years are for. He is also, in these years, sick in ways that are genuinely difficult to comprehend from the outside. The headaches are now arriving for stretches of days at a time, sometimes weeks. He describes them in letters with the precision of someone who has been forced to become an expert in his own suffering. The pain begins behind one eye, usually the right, and spreads across the skull in waves. Light becomes intolerable, sound becomes intolerable. The nausea is so severe that he sometimes cannot keep food down for days. During the worst episodes, he lies in a darkened room with a cloth over his eyes and cannot read, cannot write, cannot think in any sustained way. Between the episodes, he works with an intensity that his correspondents find alarming. He sleeps little. He walks enormous distances in the mountains, despite the eye problems, because the walking is the thinking, because something about the rhythm of the body moving through space unlocks the mind in ways that sitting at a desk cannot. He writes standing at a high desk because sitting aggravates the pain. He dictates to friends occasionally when the eyesight is too bad for him to write himself. He produces in these conditions some of the most concentrated philosophical writing of the 19th century. The Gay Science Daybreak, The Wanderer and His Shadow, books written by someone who is, in the most literal physical sense, fighting for every hour of clarity he can extract from a body that is consistently withdrawing clarity from him. There is something important here about the philosophy itself, not just the biography, because the ideas that emerge in these years are not the ideas of someone who is theorizing about suffering from a comfortable distance. They are the ideas of someone who is living inside it. When Friedrich writes about the need to say yes to existence, to affirm life rather than flee from it, to find a way to live fully in a world that offers no guarantees and no cosmic insurance policy, he is not writing from a position of health and ease. He is writing from a position of chronic pain, isolation, professional failure, and the specific grief of someone who has lost the two things that had made the world feel inhabitable. This matters because it means the philosophy has been tested. Not in the seminar room, in the body, in the rented rooms, in the mountain walks taken in conditions that most people would have used as a reason to stop. He keeps not stopping. This is, in its way, the argument. The books find almost no readers. This is the fact that the later fame makes it easy to forget. Friedrich Nietzsche, in his productive years, is essentially unknown. He sends copies of his books to thinkers he respects, and receives polite, puzzled responses or no response at all. He writes to the composer Brahms, hoping for some recognition from the musical world he has lost through the Wagner break. Brahms does not reply. He writes to the great historian Jacob Burckhardt, his colleague at Basel, whose thinking he admires enormously, and Burckhardt responds with friendly warmth and a careful, consistent refusal to engage with the actual ideas. He writes to Cosima occasionally, unable to fully sever the connection, and the letters she sends back are civil and distant and feel like correspondence with someone who has decided to remember him as a person he used to be. The isolation is not dramatic. It is not the romantic isolation of the misunderstood genius raging against a hostile world. It is quieter and more corrosive than that. It is the isolation of someone who is doing what seems to him the most important work imaginable, and cannot find a single person who thinks it is important too, who sends his thinking out into the world and hears mostly silence, who begins to wonder, in the darkest of the headache days, whether the silence means the thinking is wrong, or whether it means the thinking is right, and the world is not yet ready, and whether there is any real difference between those two possibilities from where he is sitting. He does not resolve this. He lives inside it. He moves from city to city, following the climate, following whatever combination of altitude and temperature and light gives him the most hours of functionality per day. Sorrento, Genoa, Venice, Turin, Sils Maria in the Swiss Engadine, where the mountain air at 6,000 feet does something to the headaches that nothing else manages. He returns to Sils Maria again and again. He has a room there, simple, sparse, a bed and a desk and a window looking at the mountains and the lake. It is at Sils Maria, in August 1881, walking along the lake, that it happens he is 36 years old. He is alone in the way he has been alone for years now, structurally, daily, without prospect of change. He walks along the path above the lake, and beside a large pyramidal rock at the shore, the thought arrives. Not as an argument, not as a conclusion he has been building toward, as a vision, as something that lands with the force of the physical. What if you had to live this exact life again? Every moment of it, every headache, every unanswered letter, every morning in the rented room, every mountain walk, every loss, not as punishment, not as fantasy, as the actual structure of existence. What if the universe ran in cycles, finite matter and energy playing out their combinations across infinite time, and this life, your life, every specific, unrepeatable moment of it, was fated to return, had already returned, would return again and again without variation, forever? He stands by the rock and feels the thoughts settle into him like something geological, like something that has always been true and has just now become visible. He writes in his notebook, 6,000 feet above sea level and much higher above all human things. He does not mean the altitude. There is a madman in the marketplace. It is midday. He has lit a lantern. He is running through the crowded square, holding the lantern up in the bright noon sun, looking for something, looking for God, and the people in the marketplace laugh at him. They are atheists, most of them, or something close enough to atheism that the distinction no longer matters. They have already moved past belief. They find the madman amusing the way you find someone alarming about a danger you've decided is not real. The madman stops running, he looks at the crowd, and then he says something that is not a celebration and not a lament and not a simple statement of fact, but something that does not have a clean name yet. God is dead. God remains dead. And we have killed him. Then he asks, how did we do this? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What were we doing when we unchained this earth from its sun? Where is it moving now? Where are we moving away from all suns? Are we not plunging continually? Backward, sideward, forward, in all directions? Is there still any up or down? Are we not straying as through an infinite nothing? The crowd does not understand what he is talking about. The madman throws his lantern on the ground. It shatters. He says, I have come too early. This tremendous event is still on its way. It has not yet reached the ears of men. He leaves. He goes into several churches and sings a requiem. When asked what he is doing there, he says, what are these churches now if not the tombs and sepulchres of God? Friedrich writes this parable in 1882 in The Gay Science, and it is one of the most misread passages in the history of philosophy. It has been read as atheist triumphalism, as nihilist despair, as the announcement of a new age of freedom, as the confession of a man who has lost his faith and is trying to make a virtue of the loss. It is none of these things. To understand what he actually means, you have to first understand what he does not mean. He does not mean that God has been logically disproven. The arguments against God's existence had been available for centuries before Friedrich picked up his pen. Hume had undermined the design argument in the 18th century. Kant had demonstrated the limits of pure reason's ability to establish theological claims. Darwin had provided a mechanism for the complexity of life that did not require a designer. None of this is news by 1882. The educated European has had access to these arguments for generations. What Friedrich means is something different and more devastating than any of these arguments. He means that the foundation has been removed, not the arguments, the foundation. The thing that was holding the entire structure up, not just the specifically religious parts of it, but everything built on top of the religion, the morality, the sense of purpose, the confidence that history is going somewhere, the belief that suffering has meaning, the conviction that goodness will ultimately be rewarded and evil ultimately punished, the framework that made the universe feel, if not exactly friendly, then at least comprehensible, at least oriented towards something worth orienting toward. That is what has died, and the death is not an event. It is a process. It is something that has been happening slowly for centuries and is only now becoming visible in its full implications. The madman is not announcing a recent occurrence. He is announcing that something that has already happened has not yet been understood. The churches are still standing. The prayers are still being said. The moral language inherited from Christianity is still being used by people who no longer believe in the metaphysics that made the language meaningful. Everyone is going through the motions of a civilization whose foundations have quietly, without announcement, without any single dramatic moment of collapse, dissolved. This is what Friedrich means by, I have come too early. Not that the death of God is coming, it has already come. What is coming, what has not yet arrived, is the understanding of what it means, the full weight of it, the full consequence. And that consequence, when it finally arrives in human consciousness, when people finally understand, not just intellectually, but in their bones, what it means to live in a universe with no moral guarantor, no cosmic purpose, no ultimate justice, will be the greatest crisis in the history of Western civilization. He is not celebrating this. He is not lamenting it either, exactly, but he is not celebrating it. To understand why, you have to go back further than the madman in the marketplace. You have to go back to what Christianity actually was, not as theology, not as a set of doctrines to be argued about by philosophers, but as a structure of meaning. as the thing that made daily life navigable for 1,000 years of European existence. Think about what it meant to be a medieval European, not the mythology of it, not the romanticized version with the cathedrals and the illuminated manuscripts, the actual daily experience of it. You are a peasant in 14th century France. Your life is brutal by any modern measure. The labor is exhausting and unrelenting. The cold in winter is a genuine threat. Your children die with a frequency that contemporary medicine has made almost unimaginable. The plague arrives without warning and kills a third of everyone you know in a single year. Justice is arbitrary and often cruel. The powerful do what they want and you have no recourse. And yet there is a framework that holds all of this inside something larger than itself. God is watching. God knows you're suffering. God has a purpose that your limited human perspective cannot fully see, but that is real and that is good. The king who oppresses you rules by divine right, but will answer to a higher authority than any earthly one. The plague that kills your children is not random, meaningless destruction, but part of a plan whose full dimensions will only become clear in eternity. You will see your children again. The suffering is not the final word. You can argue about whether any of this is true. Friedrich has already argued about it and reached his conclusion, but notice what it does. Notice the psychological and existential function it performs. It does not just comfort, it orients. It gives the universe a direction. It gives your individual life a place in a larger story. It gives your suffering a meaning that does not depend on whether the suffering is resolved in your lifetime. It gives your moral choices a weight that extends beyond their immediate consequences. It makes the world, for all its horror, a world that is ultimately on the side of something worth being on the side of. This is what Friedrich means when he talks about the Christian horizon. Not the specific doctrines, the orientation, the sense that the universe has a direction, and that direction is, in some ultimate sense, good. And this orientation, he argues, has not just shaped the explicitly religious parts of European civilization. It has shaped everything. The Enlightenment philosophers who rejected Christianity still believed in reason with a capital R, in progress with a capital P, in the idea that history was going somewhere better, that human beings were gradually ascending toward a condition of greater freedom and justice and happiness. They took the Christian eschatology, the story of history moving toward a final redemption, and secularized it. They kept the structure and replaced the content. God became reason. Heaven became the rational society. The saints became the philosophers. The scripture became the scientific method. Marx did the same thing with different content. History is moving toward the classless society the way Christian history was moving toward the kingdom of God. The proletariat plays the role of the chosen people. The revolution plays the role of the apocalypse. The structure is identical. The metaphysics has been replaced, but the need the metaphysics was serving, the need for history to mean something, for suffering to be working towards something, for the direction of the universe to be ultimately just. This need has not been replaced at all. It has just been given different furniture. Friedrich sees this clearly. He sees that every secular ideology of his century is, underneath its secular language, a Christian heresy, a way of keeping the emotional and psychological benefits of the Christian framework while pretending to have moved beyond it. And he sees that this pretense is precisely the problem, because if you do not face what has actually been lost, if you simply replace the furniture while keeping the need for the furniture, you are not free, you are not honest. You are doing what he will come to call the most dangerous thing a human being can do, which is lying to yourself about what you actually believe and what you actually need and what the world actually is. The death of God, properly understood, is not just the death of the specific claim that there is a personal deity who created the universe and watches over it. It is the death of the entire structure of meaning that was built on top of that claim. It is the removal of the horizon, the unchaining of the earth from its sun, the sudden vertigo of a creature that has been navigating by a fixed point for 1,000 years and has just looked up to find the fixed point gone. What do you orient by now? What do you build on? What makes a moral choice meaningful if there is no ultimate judge? What makes suffering bearable if there is no ultimate purpose? What makes your individual life matter if there is no cosmic story in which it plays a necessary part? These are not rhetorical questions. Friedrich is not asking them to make a point. He is asking them because they are the actual situation, because refusing to ask them is the alternative. And refusing to ask them is what produces the thing he fears most. He calls it nihilism, and here is where the misreading usually begins, because nihilism is a word that has been used so loosely and in so many contexts that it has lost almost all of its precision. When people hear Nietzsche and nihilism in the same sentence, they tend to assume he is advocating for it, that nihilism is his conclusion, that the death of God leads him to the position that nothing matters and all values are equally empty, and the appropriate response to a meaningless universe is either hedonism or despair, or some combination of the two. This is almost exactly backwards. Nihilism is not Friedrich's answer. Nihilism is the disease he is trying to cure. It is what happens to a civilization when the framework collapses, and nobody has the honesty or the courage to face the collapse directly. It is the spiritual condition of a people who have lost their orientation and are responding to the loss not by finding a new orientation, but by pretending the old one is still there, or by deciding that since the old orientation was false, no orientation is possible, that values are arbitrary and effort is pointless, and the universe is a joke. He sees both responses everywhere around him. He sees the people who are still performing Christianity, still going through the motions of a faith they no longer actually hold, because the motions are familiar and the alternative is too frightening to contemplate. He sees the people who have concluded from the death of God that nothing matters, who have taken the absence of cosmic validation as permission to stop trying, who have made a philosophy out of exhaustion. He sees the beginning of what he will call the age of the last men, the people who have abandoned greatness as a possibility and settled for comfort, for safety, for the small pleasures of a life without aspiration or risk or genuine commitment to anything larger than their own immediate satisfaction. The last men are, for Friedrich, the most disturbing possibility of all. More disturbing than the active nihilists who at least have energy. More disturbing than the tragic heroes who at least have dignity. The last men are the people who blink and ask, what is happiness? And find it in their small pleasures and their comfortable routines and their careful avoidance of everything that might demand more from them than they want to give. They are comfortable, they are safe, they are in some technical sense content, and they are, Friedrich believes, the end of something. The end of the human aspiration toward greatness that has driven every genuine achievement in art and philosophy and science and culture throughout history. The last men do not produce tragedies or cathedrals or philosophies or revolutions. They produce entertainment. They produce the pleasant management of decline. He does not want to be a last man. He does not want the century he is living in to produce last men. And he does not want the solution to nihilism to be a new version of the old lie, a secular replacement for Christianity that keeps the structure while pretending to have moved beyond it. He wants something harder than any of these things. He wants the honest confrontation with what has actually been lost. He wants to stand in the rubble of the collapsed framework and look at it clearly, without flinching, without immediately reaching for a replacement, and ask, what is actually true here? What can actually be built on? What does a human being look like who has faced the full weight of this and not been destroyed by it? This is the question the madman is really asking. Not whether God exists. That question has been answered. The question is, what do we do now? Not we the civilization, not we the philosophers, but we the individual human beings who are alive in this moment, who have inherited a structure of meaning that no longer holds, who can feel the vertigo of the removed horizon even when we cannot name it, who wake up some mornings with the vague but persistent sense that the things we are doing with our lives do not add up to anything we actually believe in. What do we do now? Friedrich does not answer this question immediately. He circles it for years. He approaches it from different angles. He writes around it and through it, and sometimes directly at it. The answers he eventually arrives at, the eternal recurrence, Amor Fati, the will to power properly understood, these are not cheerful answers. They are not the answers of someone who has found a comfortable replacement for what was lost. They are the answers of someone who has decided that the honest response to the removed horizon is not to find a new horizon, not to pretend you can still see one, but to learn to navigate without one, to find in the navigation itself, in the act of moving through a universe that offers no fixed point, something that is not consolation, but is not despair either, something that requires the full force of everything you are. He is standing by the rock at Sils Maria. The thought has arrived, the thought that will either destroy him or become the foundation. The thought that is not a cosmological theory, and not a consolation, and not a philosophical system, but something much more personal and much more demanding than any of those things. What if you had to live this exact life again? Not the life you wish you had lived, not the life you're planning to live once things improve, once the headaches stop, once the books find their readers, once the belonging returns. This life, the rented rooms, the failed friendships, the unanswered letters, the pain, the silence, the question that has no edges and no bottom. Would you say yes? That is the whole question. That is the question underneath every question he has been asking since he was 5 years old, and watched them carry his father's coffin out the door. That is what the death of God makes unavoidable. Because as long as God exists, as long as the framework holds, you do not have to answer it. The framework answers it for you. Your life matters because God made it. Your suffering has purpose because God permits it. The answer to, would you say yes, is already given, already embedded in the structure of a universe that is underneath everything on your side. But when the framework collapses, when the horizon is gone, when the earth is unchained from its sun, then the question lands with its full weight. Would you say yes to this? To all of it? To exactly this, with nothing added and nothing taken away? Friedrich does not answer yet. He is not ready yet. The answer requires something he has not yet fully built. It requires understanding not just what has been lost, but what, in the space left by the loss, becomes possible. It requires understanding what a human being actually is, underneath the framework, underneath the morality, underneath the 1,000 years of Christian civilization that have shaped the way Western people think about value and goodness, and what a life is for. It requires going further down before it is possible to go up. Section 5 is where the thought lands in full. But before the thought can land, you need to understand what kind of person is capable of receiving it. What kind of person can hear the demon's question and not immediately reach for the exits? That is what the eternal recurrence is actually testing. Not your philosophy, not your intellectual position on questions of cosmology or metaphysics, something much more intimate than any of those things. Whether you have actually said yes to your life, not in principle, not with reservations, not the yes that means I accept this because I have no choice. The yes that means I would choose it again, I would choose it infinitely. That yes, whether you have it, whether you can build it, whether it is even possible for a human being to reach it honestly, without lying to themselves about what they are saying yes to. Let me tell you about a demon. Not a demon in the theological sense, not a creature from a medieval bestiary with wings and a specific jurisdiction over a specific category of sin. A demon in the older sense, a voice, a presence, something that arrives in the night, in the specific vulnerability of the night, when the defenses are down and the comfortable stories you tell yourself about your life in the daylight hours no longer have quite the same force, when the darkness makes everything feel more true than it does in the morning. The demon leans down and speaks to you, and what it says is this life, as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more, and there will be nothing new in it, but every pain and every joy and every thought and sigh and everything unutterably small or great in your life will have to return to you, all in the same succession and sequence. The eternal hourglass of existence is turned upside down again and again, and you with it, speck of dust. Then the demon waits. Friedrich writes this in The Gay Science in 1882, 1 year after the vision by the rock at Sils Maria, and the question he asks immediately after the demon speaks is not what do you think about this as a cosmological proposition. The question is, how does it land? What does it do to you? Does it crush you? Or does it transform you? Do you fall to the ground and gnash your teeth and curse the demon who spoke it? Or do you experience a tremendous moment, the moment when you answer, you are a god, and never have I heard anything more divine? Your response to this question, Friedrich believes, tells you everything about where you actually are, not where you think you are, not where you present yourself as being when the question is asked in daylight, in company, with your self-image intact and your philosophical positions organized and ready for deployment. Where you actually are, in the dark, when the demon speaks. When there is nobody watching and no performance required, and the question lands in the place where you actually live. First, understand what the thought is not. It is not, primarily, a cosmological claim. Friedrich does speculate about the physics of it, about whether a universe of finite matter and energy operating across infinite time must necessarily repeat its configurations, whether the specific arrangement of atoms that constitutes this moment has occurred before and will occur again. He finds this speculation interesting. He takes it seriously enough to think about it carefully in his notebooks. But this is not the weight of the thought. This is not why it stopped him by the rock at Sils Maria in August 1881. This is not why he wrote in his notebook afterward that he was 6,000 feet above sea level and much higher above all human things. The weight of the thought is not cosmological, it is existential, it is a test, the most demanding test Friedrich can imagine, for the question that has been underneath everything he has written since the break with Wagner, since the rented rooms, since the wandering years, since the parsonage, the question of whether a human being can genuinely, fully without reservation or escape hatch or mental qualification, say yes to their own existence, not yes to existence in the abstract, not yes to the idea of life as a general phenomenon worth affirming, yes to this, to the specific, unrepeatable, accidental particular life you are actually living, with its specific texture and specific failures and specific losses and specific wasted afternoons and specific moments of shame that you have never told anyone about, and specific griefs that have not resolved and specific pains that have not lifted, not the life you wish you had, not the life you're planning to live once circumstances improve, not the life you would have chosen if you had been given a menu. This life, exactly this. Would you choose it again? And again, and again, and again, infinitely. Most people, if they are honest, cannot say yes to this. This is not a judgment. Friedrich is not condemning the people who cannot say yes. He is diagnosing, he is describing the actual spiritual condition of most human beings. In a civilization that has just lost its framework, that has just had the horizon removed, that is navigating the aftermath of the death of God, whether it knows it or not. Most people live in a posture of waiting. This is the thing he sees most clearly. The thing the eternal recurrence is designed to make visible by forcing you to imagine the waiting removed. The waiting works like this. Your life as it currently is contains things you accept and things you're tolerating until they change. The job you're doing until the real work becomes possible. The relationship you're in until you figure out what you actually want. The city you're living in until the right opportunity arrives. The version of yourself you are being until you become the version you are working toward. There is always a next thing, a better configuration just ahead, a future in which the current difficulties have been resolved and the current insufficiencies have been corrected, and the life you're actually living has been replaced by the life that justifies having lived this one. This future is the escape hatch. This future is what makes the present tolerable without requiring you to actually inhabit it. You do not need to say yes to this because this is temporary. This is the version you are living through on the way to the version you will say yes to. The eternal recurrence removes the escape hatch, not by proving the future won't come, not by arguing against hope or planning, or the reasonable human practice of working toward better conditions, but by asking, what if the future that is coming is this? What if the life you are living through on the way to the life worth living is the life? What if there is no later version where it all makes sense? What if this particular arrangement of circumstances, this specific texture of daily existence, this life with all its incompleteness and disappointment and unglamorous repetition, is the one that repeats? The hourglass turns over. You are here again. The job, the relationship, the city, the version of yourself you have been tolerating, the specific quality of Tuesday morning, the specific taste of the particular disappointment you have been carrying, all of it, again, with nothing skipped and nothing improved and nothing finally resolved. Does something in you say yes or no? Friedrich is sitting by the rock at Sils Maria, and the thought arrives, and he knows immediately that it is the most important thought he has ever had. Not because it is the most philosophically complex or the most intellectually sophisticated, because it is the most honest, because it cuts through every layer of self-protection and comfortable self-narrative and gets directly to the thing underneath. Do you actually love your life, or do you merely endure it while waiting for it to become something you can love? He sits with this for a long time. He has enormous personal stakes in the answer. He is 36 years old. He is in chronic pain. He is essentially unknown. The books he has written have found almost no readers. The friendship that was the closest thing to home he ever had is gone. The academic career is gone. The belonging is gone. He lives alone in rented rooms and walks in the mountains and writes with an urgency that has nowhere to go because there is nobody on the other end receiving it. If anyone has reason to say no to this life, to look at the eternal recurrence and feel the demon's question as a curse rather than an invitation, it is Friedrich at Sils Maria in August 1881. And yet, something in him, the same, something that resisted Schopenhauer's resignation when he was 21, the same something that made him leave Bayreuth rather than keep pretending, the same something that has kept him writing through the headaches and the silence and the rented rooms, something in him rises to meet the thought rather than collapsing under it. Not immediately, not easily, not with the clean triumphalism that the later reputation sometimes suggests. He writes in his notebooks about the terror of it as well as the exhilaration. He is honest about the fact that the thought is devastating before it is liberating, that the first response to the demon is not yes, but something closer to, I am not ready for this. I do not yet know how to say yes to this and mean it. But he also knows that not being ready is not the same as the yes being impossible. He knows that the work of the next years, whatever those years contain, is the work of becoming the kind of person who can say yes to the demon and mean it. Not as performance, not as philosophical position, as the actual orientation of a life. This is what he means by Amor Fati. It is not a passive acceptance. It is not the stoic resignation of someone who has decided to make peace with what they cannot change. It is something more active and more demanding than resignation. It is love, the actual transformation of your relationship to your own existence, so that you do not merely accept what is given but want it, so that the life you are living is not the life you are enduring while waiting for another one, but the life you would choose if choosing were possible. Not because it is easy, not because it is pleasant, not because it has been arranged to your specifications, but because it is yours, because you are in it, because the alternative to saying yes to it is spending the only existence you have in a posture of waiting for a different one that will never come. Let us stay with this for a moment. Let us not move past it too quickly, because this is where the philosophy lives, not in the argument for it, but in the actual felt weight of the question. Think about the thing in your life that you most want to be different, the specific thing, not the abstract category of difficulty or disappointment, but the particular one, the loss that has not healed, the relationship that did not work, the work that has not found its audience, the version of yourself that you have not yet managed to become, the door that has not opened, the thing you carry that nobody knows you're carrying. Now hear the demon's question. This too, this specifically, not in spite of this, but including this especially, this woven into the fabric of the life that repeats. Would you say yes? Most people feel the no immediately. The no arrives before the thinking does. The no is in the body before it is in the mind. The no says, not this particular thing. I accept the general difficulty of existence, but not this specific one. This one is the thing I'm waiting to have resolved before I can genuinely inhabit my life. Friedrich does not tell you the no is wrong. He does not say you should not feel it. He says, notice it. Notice where the no lives. Notice what it tells you about the relationship between you and your own life. Notice that the no is the escape hatch, the thing you're holding in reserve, the thing you're saving for a future that will resolve it. Notice that as long as you hold the no, as long as there is a version of your existence that you're tolerating rather than choosing, you are not fully here. You are living at a slight angle to your own life, present in some rooms of it and absent from others, saying yes to the acceptable parts and waiting out the rest. The eternal recurrence does not ask you to pretend the no is a yes. It does not ask you to perform gratitude for things that are genuinely difficult or manufacture joy in the face of genuine suffering. Friedrich is not a self-help philosopher. He is not asking you to look on the bright side. He is asking something much harder than that. He is asking whether you can move through the no to something on the other side of it, whether you can face the thing you most want to be different, face it fully without flinching, without minimizing it, without the consolation of a future that will eventually resolve it, and find in the facing itself something that is not acceptance and not resignation, but something that does not yet have a comfortable name. The strange and difficult transformation of your relationship to your own existence that happens when you stop waiting for it to become something else. He calls the person who has achieved this the one who does not merely bear what is necessary, but loves it. Amor Fati, love of fate. Not the love that comes from the fate being arranged to your liking. The love that comes from the choosing, from the transformation of what was given into what is wanted, from the strange alchemy of a consciousness that has decided not to stand outside its own life, waiting for it to justify itself, but to stand inside it completely, to be here, to say yes. He also calls this person, in some moods, Zarathustra. In other moods, he circles toward the word Übermensch, which has been so catastrophically mistranslated and misappropriated that it requires careful handling. We will come to it, but for now the simpler formulation is enough. The person who can say yes to the eternal recurrence. The person who has moved through the terror of the thought and out the other side into something that is not comfort, but is genuine. Not the person who has been given a good life and is grateful for it. The person who has been given their life, exactly their life, and has found in it, through the honest, unflinching looking at it, something worth saying yes to. This is not a common achievement. Friedrich does not pretend it is. He knows how demanding the thought is because he knows how demanding his own life is, and he is trying, in the rented rooms and on the mountain walks and in the notebooks and in the books that nobody reads, to actually do the thing he is describing, to actually build the yes, rather than merely arguing for its possibility. He is not there yet when the thought arrives at Sils Maria. He will spend the rest of his productive years trying to get there. Some days he is closer than others. Some days the headaches and the silence and the absence of belonging make the yes feel genuinely impossible. Some days, walking in the mountains in the specific light of the Swiss Engadine, with the lake below and the mountains above and the particular quality of the air at that altitude that makes the world feel briefly, completely real, something in him is genuinely there. Something in him says yes and means it. But this is the work. This is what the philosophy is for. Not to argue you into a position, but to show you a direction. To say, here is the question that cuts through everything else to the thing underneath. Here is the test that bypasses all the philosophical positions and the intellectual arguments and the careful constructions of a self that is managing its existence from a safe distance. Here is the demon, and here is the question, and the answer you give in the dark when nobody is watching is the answer that tells you what you're actually made of and what you actually believe, and whether the life you're living is the life you're actually living, or just the life you're passing through on the way to. One you never arrive at. The hourglass turns, you are here again. This moment, this specific unrepeatable Tuesday or Thursday or whatever day it is, with its specific texture and its specific weight and its specific mixture of the bearable and the unbearable. The demon waits. There is one more thing that needs to be said about the eternal recurrence before we move to what it makes possible, before we move to Amor Fati and the will to power and the figure of Zarathustra descending from his mountain to tell humanity what he has found. The eternal recurrence is not asking you to stop wanting things to be different. It is not asking you to abandon effort or aspiration. or the reasonable human drive toward better conditions. Friedrich is not arguing for passivity. He is not arguing that because the boulder rolls back down, there is no point in pushing it. He is arguing something more precise and more difficult. He is arguing that the quality of your engagement with your life cannot be held hostage to its outcomes. That the yes cannot be contingent. Cannot be. I will say yes to this life when it finally produces the results I'm waiting for. Cannot be. I'm saying yes to the version of myself I'm becoming, not the version I currently am. Cannot be a yes with a hidden asterisk, a yes that is actually a sophisticated form of waiting. The yes has to be now. It has to include this. It has to be, in the most literal and demanding sense, unconditional. Not because conditions do not matter, they matter enormously. Not because outcomes are irrelevant, they are not irrelevant. But because a life lived in the posture of waiting for conditions to justify your full presence in it is a life not fully lived. Because the hourglass turns regardless, because the time you spend holding your genuine engagement in reserve, saving it for the moment when the circumstances finally merit it, is time that does not come back. Because the demon does not ask what your life was like when it was going well. The demon asks about the whole thing, every part of it, the waiting included. Would you say yes to the waiting too? Friedrich sits by the rock at Sils Maria, and the thought settles into him. He is not yet the person who can say yes. He knows this, but he knows something else too, something that will carry him through the years ahead, through the books that still find no readers, and the headaches that still arrive without warning, and the loneliness that has become the permanent texture of his existence. He knows that the question is the right question. He knows that everything else, all the philosophy he has written, and all the philosophy he will write, is in some sense preparation for this question and response to it. He knows that the madman in the marketplace, and the death of God, and the collapse of the framework, and the wandering years in the rented rooms have all been, without his knowing it, the path to this rock, this lake, this thought. He takes out his notebook. He writes 6,000 feet above sea level and much higher above all human things. He begins walking back. The thought is with him now. It will not leave. It is the kind of thought that once you have had it, reorganizes everything else around itself. The kind of thought that you cannot unknow. The kind of thought that makes the question it contains unavoidable for the rest of your life. Would you say yes? He does not yet know the answer, but he has, for the first time, stopped looking for a way around the question. That is the beginning. There is a sentence Friedrich writes in 1882, the same year as the madman in the marketplace, the same year the demon speaks, and it is the sentence that contains the whole of what he is trying to build toward. He writes it almost quietly, without the drama you might expect from someone who has been working toward it for 20 years. He writes, I want to learn more and more to see as beautiful what is necessary in things. Then I shall be one of those who make things beautiful. Amor Fati, let that be my love henceforth. I do not want to wage war against what is ugly. I do not want to accuse. I do not even want to accuse those who accuse. Looking away shall be my only negation, and all in all and on the whole, someday I wish to be only a yes-sayer. Read that again, not as a philosophical position, as a personal declaration from a man who is nearly blind, in chronic pain, living alone in a rented room in Genoa, whose books have found almost no readers, whose closest friendship ended in public and without resolution, whose body is dismantling itself from the inside with a consistency that makes every productive hour feel like something extracted rather than given. Someday, I wish to be only a yes-sayer. Not, I am a yes-sayer. Not, I have achieved this. Someday, I wish. The sentence is written in the future tense and the optative mood, the mood of longing and aspiration, and this matters more than the philosophical content, because it tells you that Amor Fati is not a position Friedrich has arrived at. It is a direction he is moving in. It is the name he gives to the practice of becoming a person who can say yes to the eternal recurrence and mean it, not the achievement, the practice, the daily, unglamorous, never-finished work of transforming your relationship to your own existence so that the yes is not performed but genuine. This distinction between the achieved state and the practice toward it is everything, because the achieved state, if presented as something Friedrich has reached, or that you should be able to reach given sufficient philosophical understanding, becomes just another form of the consolation he has spent his entire life opposing. Another way of saying, there is a destination, here is how to get there. Once you arrive, you will be at peace. Amor Fati as destination is the self-help version, the inspirational poster version, the version that gets quoted without the rented room and the headaches, and the unanswered letters that surround the quotation and give it its actual meaning. Amor Fati as practice is something else entirely. It is the daily choice made in conditions that make the choice genuinely difficult to move toward the yes rather than the no. Not because the no is wrong, not because the things that generate the no are not real, but because the no, indulged, becomes a life, because the accumulation of necessary no's, the ones that say not yet, not this, not until things are different, adds up over years and decades to a life lived at a consistent remove from itself, a life in which full presence is always being held in reserve for a moment that keeps receding. To understand what Amor Fati actually requires, you have to understand what it is not. It is not optimism. Friedrich despises optimism. He has spent years arguing against it in its various forms. The Christian optimism that says suffering has a divine purpose. The Enlightenment optimism that says history is progressing toward a rational society. The Romantic optimism that says art can redeem existence. The Wagnerian optimism that says the total artwork will gather a people around shared values and shared awe. All of these are, in Friedrich's analysis, forms of the same fundamental refusal. The refusal to look at what is actually true without immediately reaching for a narrative that makes it more bearable than it is. Optimism says it will get better. There is a plan. The suffering serves a purpose. Stay with it, and the purpose will eventually become clear. Amor Fati says something completely different. Amor Fati says it may not get better. There may be no plan. The suffering may serve no purpose whatsoever, and I am saying yes anyway. Not because I have been given reasons, not because I have been consoled, not because I have found a way to make the difficulty feel secretly good, but because I refuse to spend the only existence I have waiting for it to become something I can say yes to. This is the crucial distinction. The optimist and the Amor Fati practitioner might look similar from the outside. Both are engaging with their lives rather than withdrawing from them. Both are moving forward rather than collapsing. But the optimist is engaging because they believe the engagement will eventually be rewarded. The Amor Fati practitioner is engaging regardless of whether it will be rewarded. The optimist's yes is contingent. The Amor Fati yes is unconditional. And the unconditional yes is exponentially harder than the contingent one, because the contingent yes has a safety net. If things do not improve, if the purpose of the suffering does not become clear, if the plan turns out not to exist, the optimist has been betrayed by reality, and the collapse of the optimism is justified and understandable. The unconditional yes has no safety net. You have said yes to the thing as it is, including the possibility that it will not improve, including the possibility that there is no plan. And now you have to live inside that yes and keep it genuine when the conditions that generated the no keep being present. This is what Friedrich means when he says that his philosophy is for the few, not because he is an elitist in the sense of believing that certain people are inherently superior by birth or class or ethnicity, but because genuinely unconditional yes is genuinely rare. Most people are not constitutionally or psychologically equipped for it. Most people need the safety net. Most people need at some level the belief that the suffering will eventually make sense, that the effort will eventually be rewarded, that the life they are living is moving toward a justification. He does not condemn this. He understands it. He has needed it himself at various points. The belonging at Tribschen, the vision of what he and Wagner were building together, were both forms of the safety net, ways of placing his individual suffering inside a larger story that gave it meaning. He has felt the pull of the optimism he is arguing against. He is not speaking from outside the human need for consolation. He is speaking from inside it, from the experience of having had the consolation removed, of having been left with the question without the answer, and having had to decide what to do in that condition. What he has decided is yes anyway, not because he has found a new consolation, because he has decided that the search for consolation is itself the problem, that the life spent waiting for justification is the life not lived, that the yes has to precede the justification rather than following from it, has to be given before the evidence is in rather than after, has to be, in the most demanding sense, an act of will rather than a response to favourable conditions. This is where the will to power enters, not as domination, not as the drive to control other people or accumulate resources or impose your vision on the world by force. Friedrich is clear about this, or tries to be clear about it, though the clarity gets lost in the misreadings that will follow him for the next century and a half. The will to power is not the will to power over others. It is the will to power over yourself, the drive towards self-overcoming, the capacity to become more than what you currently are by moving through what currently limits you rather than around it. Think about what self-overcoming actually means in practice, not as an abstract philosophical category, but as the lived experience of it. You are at the edge of something, a difficulty, a loss, a fear, a limitation that has been defining the boundary of your existence, the thing you have been organizing your life around avoiding, or the thing you have been tolerating as the permanent texture of your condition. Self-overcoming is not the elimination of this thing. It is not the achievement of a condition in which the difficulty no longer exists. It is the movement through it, the discovery made in the moving through rather than before it, that the boundary you thought was the edge of what you could bear was not the edge, that there is more on the other side, that you are larger than the thing you were afraid of being larger than. Friedrich experiences this constantly in the years of the wandering and the rented rooms. Every day he sits down to write in conditions that would justify not writing is an act of self-overcoming. Every mountain walk taken in the middle of a 4-day headache is an act of self-overcoming, not because the headache stops, it does not stop, but because he discovers again, in the doing of the thing, that he is not defined by the headache, that the pain is not the whole of what he is, that there is something in him that the pain cannot reach, not by transcending the pain, not by pretending the pain is not there, but by moving alongside the pain into the work. This is what he means by ascending forms of the will to power. Not the expansion of your influence over the external world, but the expansion of your capacity to inhabit your own existence fully, the growing of the interior space in which you live, the discovery made through the actual practice of self-overcoming rather than through theoretical understanding of it, that what you are is not fixed, that the person who was defined by this loss or this limitation or this fear is not the final version of what you are, that you can become something that includes what you were and moves beyond it without cancelling it, without pretending it was not real, without requiring that it be resolved before the becoming is permitted to continue. Zarathustra comes down from his mountain. He has been up there for 10 years, living alone in a cave with his eagle and his serpent, thinking the thoughts that the company of other people makes impossible, the too high, too cold, too clear thoughts that require the altitude and the solitude and the absence of the noise and distraction of the human world below. He has been up there with the eternal recurrence and Amor Fati and the will to power and the death of God and the question of what comes after. He has been in the mountain cave working out the answer. Now he comes down to give it. Friedrich writes, "Thus spoke Zarathustra between 1883 and 1885, in 4 parts, in conditions of extraordinary isolation and physical difficulty, and it is the most unusual major philosophical work of the 19th century. Not a treatise, not an essay, not a systematic argument from premises to conclusions, a prose poem, a series of speeches and parables and songs and visions in the voice of a figure who is not quite Friedrich and not quite a fictional character, but something between the two. The philosopher imagining what it would look like to have arrived at the destination he is still travelling toward, the philosopher writing from the future self he is trying to become. Zarathustra is not the Übermensch. This is a confusion that runs through almost every popular account of Nietzsche and it matters to get it right. Zarathustra is the teacher of the Übermensch. He is the figure who has understood what the Übermensch represents and is trying to communicate it to a humanity that is not ready to receive it. The Übermensch is not a description of someone who exists, it is a direction, an orientation, the name Friedrich gives to the possibility that opens up when the death of God is faced honestly and the nihilism is moved through rather than around and the eternal recurrence is met with yes rather than no. The German word is Übermensch, overhuman beyond human, the person who has gone beyond the merely human in the sense of having gone beyond the limitations that most human beings accept as fixed. Not beyond the human in the sense of superhuman powers or biological superiority or racial purity, the misreadings that his sister Elizabeth will enthusiastically promote after his collapse, the misreadings that will make his name synonymous for decades with everything he most opposed, beyond the human in the sense of having done the work, having faced the death of God without reaching for a replacement, having heard the demon's question and built the yes rather than performing it, having practiced Amor Fati not as a philosophical position but as a daily orientation, having discovered through the actual living of it rather than the theoretical understanding of it what a human being is capable of when it stops waiting for external validation and starts generating its own. The Übermensch is not a destination, it is a direction. Friedrich is explicit about this. He uses the image of the tightrope. Man is a rope, he writes, tied between animal and Übermensch, a rope over an abyss. What is great in man is that he is a bridge and not an end. The Übermensch is not the far shore. The far shore cannot be seen from where we are standing. The Übermensch is the direction of the walking, the commitment to keep moving across the rope rather than climbing back down to the safety of the ground. What is on the ground is the last man, the person who has looked at the abyss and decided it is not worth crossing, who has looked at the difficulty of the rope and calculated that the safety of remaining on solid ground, even if that ground is the ground of comfortable mediocrity and the pleasant management of small pleasures, is preferable to the exposure and the vertigo and the real possibility of falling. The last man is not stupid. The last man has made a rational calculation. The rope is dangerous, and the far shore is uncertain, and the comfortable ground is here and now and warm. But Friedrich cannot stand on the comfortable ground. It is not in him. The same something that resisted Schopenhauer's resignation and left Bayreuth, and kept writing in the rented rooms. This something cannot choose the last man's comfort over the tightrope's exposure. He does not know if he will make it across. He does not know if anyone will. But he knows that the crossing is the only thing worth attempting. That the life spent on the comfortable ground, however rational the calculation that led to it, is not the life he wants to have lived. There is a passage in Zarathustra that Friedrich writes in a single 10-day period in January 1883 in Rapallo, on the Italian Riviera, in a state of creative intensity so extreme that he will later describe it as something close to revelation. He is writing about what he calls the great noon, the moment of maximum clarity, the moment when the shadow is shortest, and the light most direct, and there is nowhere to hide and nothing to cushion the full weight of the question. He writes, "Have you ever said yes to a single joy? Oh, my friends, then you have said yes to all woe as well. All things are chained and entwined together. All things are in love. If you ever wanted one moment twice, if you ever said to it, you please me, happiness, instant, moment, then you wanted everything to return. You wanted everything anew, everything eternal, everything chained, entwined together, everything in love. Oh, then you loved the world. You eternal ones love it eternally and forever. And to woe too you say, pass but return, for all joy wants eternity." This is the Amor Fati argument in its most concentrated form. And notice what it is saying. It is not saying, learn to love the difficult things. It is not saying, find a way to be grateful for the suffering. It is saying something more precise and more radical than either of those things. It is saying, the joy and the woe are not separable. The thing you love most about your life and the thing you most want to be different are not two separate items on a list. one of which can be kept and one discarded. They are woven together, they are made of each other. The specific joy of the specific life you have lived is inseparable from the specific texture of difficulty and loss and failure that has surrounded it, has preceded it, has made it possible by being what it was made against. You cannot say yes to the joy and no to the woe. If you want the joy, you want the woe that came with it. If you want the moment of genuine aliveness, the moment when you felt most fully yourself and most fully present in your own existence, you want the entire fabric of circumstances and losses and failures that produced the conditions in which that moment was possible. This is not an argument, it is a description. Friedrich is describing the actual structure of a life when you look at it honestly rather than through the filter of what you wish it had been. The life does not come in separable parts. The life comes as a whole, woven together, all things chained and entwined. And the yes or no you say to it is a yes or no to the whole thing, not to the edited highlights. And if you can find even one moment, one genuine moment of joy or love or aliveness or full presence that you would want to have happened, then you have already, without knowing it, said yes to everything that made it possible. The eternal recurrence is not asking you to love the woe. It is asking you to notice that you already love the woe implicitly, every time you love the joy it was woven with. Friedrich writes Zarathustra in a state of extraordinary creative intensity, and then returns, as he always returns, to the rented rooms and the headaches and the silence and the books that still find almost no readers. He sends the first part to his publisher. He has to pay for the printing himself. He orders 40 copies. He gives 7 away to people he thinks might understand it. Of the remaining 33, he sells none. He is not surprised. He has written in Zarathustra a book for the future. He knows this. He is explicit about it in his letters. He is writing for the people who do not yet exist. For the ones who will come after the death of God has been fully understood, and the nihilism has been fully faced, and the question of what to build in the ruins has been asked with sufficient honesty and sufficient courage to receive an answer that is not a consolation. He is writing for people who need the yes and have not yet found it. He is writing, in some sense, for himself, the rented room in Rapallo, the 10-day creative intensity, the 40 copies ordered, the 7 given away, the 33 unsold. The demon asks, "Would you say yes to this?" He does not answer in words. He orders paper, he picks up his pen, he begins writing the second part. That is the answer, not the philosophy. The picking up of the pen, the continuing the yes enacted rather than argued, the Amor Fati practiced rather than proclaimed, the tightrope walked, not because the far shore is visible, but because the walking is what he is, because the alternative is the comfortable ground and he cannot choose the comfortable ground, because somewhere underneath the headaches and the isolation and the 33 unsold copies there is something that will not stop, something that says, again, again, write it again, say it more clearly, find the person who needs this and cannot yet hear it, keep going. That something does not have a philosophical name. It is older than philosophy. It is the thing that was there when he was 5 years old, watching them carry his father's coffin and filing away the question that nobody in the parsonage was asking. It is the thing that resisted Schopenhauer and left Bayreuth and kept walking in the mountains through the headaches. It is, if you want to give it a name, the will to power in its most ascending form, the drive not toward domination but toward the fullest possible expression of what he is through whatever conditions exist, regardless of whether those conditions are favourable. He is not the Übermensch, he will never be the Übermensch, but he is walking across the rope. He is walking across it in the dark, nearly blind, in pain, without an audience, without a net, and he is walking. There is a letter Friedrich writes to his friend Franz Overbeck in 1883, the same year as Zarathustra, and it is one of the most difficult letters in the history of philosophy to read, not because of what it argues, because of what it simply reports. He writes that he has had to abandon a walk he had been looking forward to because the pain arrived before he reached the edge of town. He writes that he has been in bed for 3 days. He writes that the nausea is so severe he cannot keep water down. He writes that he has been thinking in the worst hours about whether to continue, not in the philosophical sense, in the other sense. Then he writes, "But I have work to do," and the letter ends. He sends it. He gets up. He goes back to the desk. This is the biographical fact that the philosophy cannot be separated from, and that most accounts of Friedrich's thought quietly omit because it is uncomfortable, because it does not fit the image of the philosopher as a figure of intellectual mastery and visionary certainty, because it introduces into the picture of the man arguing for Amor Fati and the will to power and the yes to existence, the rather inconvenient detail that the man arguing for these things was, for most of his productive years, in conditions that made the argument genuinely costly to make. He is not writing from a position of health. He is not writing from a position of ease or abundance, or the comfortable distance of someone who has arranged their life in ways that make full presence relatively affordable. He is writing from a position of chronic physical suffering, profound isolation, professional failure, and the specific grief of someone who has lost everything that made the world feel like a place worth being in, and is choosing daily, in conditions that justify the choice not to choose it, to keep arguing for. Yes, this matters for the philosophy. It is not incidental to it, it is the proof of it. To understand what his body is actually doing to him, in these years you have to spend some time with the specifics, because the specifics matter, because the general category of illness is too abstract to carry the weight of what he is living inside. The headaches are the most constant feature. They have been present since childhood, but they intensify through his 30s into something that is no longer adequately described by the word headache. They arrive as a pressure behind one eye, usually the right, and build over hours into a pain that occupies the entire skull. During the peak of an episode, the light from a candle is intolerable. The sound of a voice in the next room is intolerable. The weight of a blanket on his body is sometimes intolerable. He lies in complete darkness and waits. The episodes last anywhere from 1 day to 3 weeks. He keeps careful records of them in his notebooks, partly because precision is his nature, and partly because recording the pain is one of the few things he can do during it. The records show that in some months he has fewer than 10 functional days. Days when the pain is below the threshold at which sustained thought is possible. Days when he can sit at the desk and hold the pen without the act of holding it becoming its own difficulty. His eyesight deteriorates steadily through the 1870s and 1880s. He is functionally blind in his right eye for most of his productive period. The left eye compensates, but the compensation is imperfect, and the strain of the compensation generates its own category of pain. Reading for more than an hour at a time is genuinely difficult. Writing for more than an hour at a time is genuinely difficult. He develops a handwriting so compressed and idiosyncratic that his correspondents sometimes cannot read his letters. He dictates occasionally. He writes in large letters on small pieces of paper, leaning close to the page, working in the brief windows between the pain and the light and the nausea. The nausea is the third element of the triad, connected to the headaches, but not identical with them. It arrives sometimes as a precursor, sometimes as a companion, sometimes as the thing that remains after the headache has begun to lift. During the worst episodes, he cannot eat for days. He loses weight he cannot afford to lose. He is already thin, already physically reduced by years of this, and the episodes of sustained nausea leave him thinner still, weaker, requiring weeks of careful management to rebuild the physical resources that a single bad episode can consume. He manages his life around these conditions with a precision that is, in its way, a form of the discipline he argues for philosophically. He learns which altitudes help and which do not. Sils Maria at 6,000 feet in the Swiss Engadin is the best. The dry air, the cold, the specific quality of the light, something about the combination reduces the frequency and severity of the episodes enough to give him the working months he needs. He organizes his years around Sils Maria, the way other people organize their years around professional obligations or family rhythms. He arrives in June. He leaves in September. Those 3 months are his most productive. The rest of the year he is in the Italian cities, Genoa, Turin, Venice, following the winter light, looking for the specific combination of temperature and humidity and altitude that gives him the most hours of functionality. He travels alone, he eats alone, he takes his meals at small restaurants where he has become a regular, where the staff know his order and do not require him to perform sociability. He walks alone for hours every day, the walking being the thinking, the rhythm of the body moving through space being the rhythm that unlocks the mind in ways that the desk cannot. He carries a notebook, he stops when a thought arrives. He writes standing up, leaning against a wall or a tree or a rock, the pen moving in the large compressed letters that nobody can quite read. He returns to his room. He sits at the desk. He writes. What he is writing, in these conditions, is accelerating. This is the paradox of the illness years. As the body diminishes, the mind intensifies. As the physical resources contract, the intellectual output expands, becomes more concentrated, more compressed, more urgent. The aphoristic style that emerged after Bayreuth, the style of human, all too human, and daybreak, and the gay science, the style of the single paragraph that lands like a thrown stone, is partly an aesthetic choice and partly a practical adaptation. He cannot sustain long continuous arguments through a 4-day headache. He can sustain single thoughts, single formulations, the individual idea brought to its point with maximum precision and minimum elaboration. The result is some of the most concentrated philosophical writing in the Western tradition. Paragraphs that contain more genuine thought than entire chapters of the systematic philosophers he is implicitly arguing against. Not because brevity is inherently better than elaboration, but because the specific brevity of these paragraphs has been forced into existence by conditions that would not permit anything longer, and the forcing has produced something that the comfortable conditions of the academic philosopher, the well-lit study, the regular meals, the uninterrupted hours, would probably not have produced. There is a relationship between the philosophy and the conditions that is not accidental. The argument for Amor Fati, for the unconditional yes, for the will to power as self-overcoming rather than domination, for the eternal recurrence as the test of whether you are genuinely present in your own existence or merely waiting for better conditions to arrive. This argument is being made by someone who has better reasons than almost anyone to say no, whose conditions provide daily, renewed, entirely legitimate reasons to withdraw from the project of full engagement and say, not today, not in this pain, not in this isolation, not without readers or recognition or belonging or the basic physical comfort that most people consider the minimum prerequisite for genuine work. He does not say not today, he says today. He says it every day that the pain permits. And on the days the pain does not permit, he lies in the dark and waits for the day it does. This is not heroism in the conventional sense. It is not the heroism of the great deed, the dramatic gesture, the visible sacrifice. It is the quieter and in some ways more demanding heroism of the sustained practice. The heroism of getting up and going back to the desk one more time in conditions that justify not going back. The heroism of continuing to make the argument for the yes when the conditions of your own life keep providing the most intimate possible evidence for the no. He is also in these years profoundly and increasingly alone. The loneliness is not the dramatic loneliness of the misunderstood genius. It is quieter and more structural than that. It is the loneliness of someone who has moved past the points of connection that most human relationships depend on. He has moved past the religious framework that structures so much social life. He has moved past the nationalist framework that was available to him as a German intellectual of his generation. He has moved past the Wagnerian framework that had given him the closest thing to community he had found as an adult. He has moved past, in his writing, the academic framework of his discipline. He is, in the most literal sense, without a framework that can be shared with the people around him. The correspondence tells this story with painful clarity. He writes to a large number of people, philosophers, composers, writers, former colleagues, old friends. The letters he sends are extraordinary documents, full of the intelligence and urgency and compressed force of the books, but warmer, more personal, more naked in their need for genuine response. He is not performing in the letters, he is reaching. The letters he receives back are almost without exception, kind and brief and slightly beside the point. People respond to the man rather than the ideas. They ask after his health, they report on their own activities, they express general admiration without engaging specifically with what he has written. They are, most of them, doing the thing that people do when they receive a communication that asks more of them than they know how to give. They are being warm in the ways that do not cost anything and absent in the ways that matter. Jacob Burckhardt, his colleague at Basel, the historian Friedrich admires most among all his contemporaries, is the paradigmatic case. They have been colleagues for years. Burckhardt is brilliant and cultured and genuinely fond of Friedrich. His responses to the books are always friendly, always perceptive in small ways, always carefully avoiding the large ways. He will not be drawn into the argument. He will not engage with the death of God, or the eternal recurrence, or the will to power, as philosophical propositions requiring a response. He responds to the style, to the intelligence, to the man, and he does not respond to the thought. Friedrich feels this. He feels it each time a reply arrives and contains everything except what he was reaching for. He does not complain about it mostly, he understands it. He has diagnosed the condition it represents, the person who finds a thought too large or too disturbing to engage with directly, and so responds to everything surrounding the thought instead. He has written about this condition with clinical precision. Being the subject of the condition rather than its observer is a different experience than writing about it. He tries with women. This is a part of the story that gets handled awkwardly in most accounts, either omitted or reduced to anecdote. But it matters because the loneliness Friedrich is living inside is not only intellectual. He is a human being who needs connection at the level of the body and the daily life, as well as the level of the mind, and the same qualities that make the intellectual connection nearly impossible to find also make the domestic and erotic connection nearly impossible to find. He falls in love, or something close to love, with Lou Salome in 1882. She is 21 years old, Russian, brilliant, entirely unconventional in her attitudes toward love and marriage and intellectual life, and when Friedrich meets her, he believes with a force that makes the belief slightly terrifying that he has found the person, the intellectual equal who is also the human companion, the one who can meet him at the level where he actually lives. He proposes twice. She refuses twice, not cruelly, not dismissively, but clearly she values him enormously. She cannot live the life he is offering, which is the life of the rented rooms and the mountain walks and the books nobody reads, and the total subordination of everything else to the question. She cannot say yes to that life. She does not want to say yes to that life. He understands this intellectually. He has written, after all, about the difficulty of the yes he knows what he is asking. He knows that the life he is offering is not the life that most people would choose if they could see it clearly. He has been living it himself, and the only reason he continues to choose it is that he seems to be constitutionally incapable of choosing otherwise. But understanding it intellectually and living inside the refusal are different things, and the months after Lou Salome's departure are some of the darkest of his life. He writes to his sister, who has been involved in the introduction to Lou and who manages the aftermath with the particular clumsy good intentions of someone who has made things worse without meaning to, letters that are barely coherent in their pain. He writes to friends describing a despair that is not the philosophical despair he has analysed and classified, but the simple human despair of someone who wanted something very badly and did not get it. He does not write Zarathustra from a position of having transcended this. He writes it from inside it. The figure of Zarathustra coming down from the mountain is in some sense the transformation of the Lou Salome grief. The philosopher who cannot find the human companion going up to the mountain alone and finding there in the solitude and the altitude and the cold the thoughts that the belonging would have prevented, making, out of the necessity of the aloneness, the philosophy of the aloneness, turning, with the will to power that is the only thing he has consistently been able to rely on, the no of the refusal into the yes of the work. This is Amor Fati in practice, not as a proclamation, as the actual daily activity of someone who has been given the raw material of their life and is choosing again and again in conditions that justify not choosing it to make something from it. There is a woman Friedrich sees occasionally in the final years in Turin. She is the landlady of one of his rooming houses, or a woman in a nearby apartment, or someone he passes regularly on his morning walk to the cafe where he takes his breakfast. The accounts vary. What is consistent across the accounts is this: she is kind to him, she speaks to him in the mornings, she asks how he is. She is not interested in the philosophy. She does not know who he is. She is simply kind in the daily, unremarkable way of someone who has decided to be kind to the thin, nearly blind, slightly odd German gentleman who comes and goes at regular hours and is clearly, in some way she cannot quite name, alone. He values this more than he can easily say. He writes about it in letters, not about her specifically, but about the quality of it, the simple human warmth of someone who sees you and speaks to you without needing you to be anything other than what you are, without the philosophical distance, without the careful warmth that does not engage, just the morning greeting, the question about his health, the ordinary human acknowledgement of another ordinary human presence. He is not ordinary, he knows he is not ordinary. The books he is writing in the rooms above the cafe or around the corner from the kind woman's apartment are not ordinary. But the need for the ordinary human warmth is not diminished by the extraordinariness of the work. It runs alongside it. It is, in some ways, intensified by it. The further the thought goes into territory that cannot be shared with most people, the more the simple shared warmth of a morning greeting means. He takes his breakfast at the cafe, he watches the people in the street, he writes in his notebook, he returns to his room, he sits at the desk. The work in these final productive years, 1886 through 1888, is extraordinary in its intensity and its range. Beyond Good and Evil, The Genealogy of Morals, The Case of Wagner, Twilight of the Idols, The Antichrist, Ecce Homo, the autobiography whose chapter titles, Why I Am So Wise, Why I Am So Clever, Why I Write Such Good Books, have been read as evidence of the approaching madness, but are more accurately read as the compressed, ironic, desperate self-assertion of someone who knows that the world has not yet understood what he has written and is trying, with everything remaining, to say, "This matters. Please look at this. I'm trying to give you something you need." He is writing faster now. The sense of urgency is increasing. Something in him knows, perhaps, that the window is closing, that the productive period has a limit that is approaching, that the body, which has been the obstacle and the companion and the proving ground for the philosophy, is moving toward a threshold beyond which the work will no longer be possible. He writes Ecce Homo in October 1888. He is 44 years old. He writes it in 3 weeks. It is the most unusual autobiography in the history of philosophy, a man assessing his own work with a combination of absolute certainty and genuine humour that belongs to someone who has moved beyond caring what the assessment looks like from the outside. He writes about his books one by one, explaining what each one was attempting, what he was trying to give the reader, why it matters. He writes with complete lucidity. There is nothing in Ecce Homo that suggests the collapse that is coming. There is everything in it that suggests a man who has understood what he has done and is trying, one last time, with the clarity that sometimes comes at the very edge of something, to make it visible. He finishes it in November. In December, the letters begin to change. Not dramatically, not all at once, gradually. Small things, formulations that are slightly off, references that don't quite connect. A grandiosity that was always present in his self-assessment, but begins to tip from irony into something else. He signs a letter to Cosima Wagner, with whom he has been trying to reconcile as Dionysus. He signs a letter to the King of Italy. He writes to Burckhardt that he would really rather have been a Basel professor than God, but he did not dare push his private egotism so far as to neglect the creation of the world. Burckhardt receives this letter and brings it immediately to Overbeck. He says, "This is not right." Overbeck takes the next train to Turin. What happens on the street we will come to. It belongs to the next section. But before we get there, before we arrive at the morning of January 3rd, 1889, and what Friedrich sees and what he does and what happens after, we need to stay for a moment with the years that preceded it. with the rented rooms and the headaches and the mountain walks and the books that found no readers, and the love that was refused and the mourning kindness of the woman whose name we do not know. We need to stay with it because this is the philosophy, not the arguments, the life inside which the arguments were made, the daily practice of the yes in conditions that made the yes genuinely costly. The Amor Fati not as a proclamation, but as the actual texture of an actual existence. The will to power not as a theory of domination, but as the thing that got a man with a 4-day headache out of bed and back to the desk one more time. He wrote in Ecce Homo that he was one thing above all else, a yes-sayer, un homme qui dit oui. He wrote it in the third person, the way he wrote everything in Ecce Homo, with the slight distance of someone describing themselves from the outside, from the future, from the position of the reader who will eventually understand what the writing was. He wrote it in the third person, but he meant it in the first. He was in the rented rooms and on the mountain walks and at the desk in Turin and at the cafe table watching the people in the street, saying yes. Not the triumphant yes of someone who has been given reasons, the quiet, daily, unglamorous, entirely genuine yes of someone who has not been given reasons and is saying it anyway. Because the pen is there, because the paper is there, because the thought is there, waiting to be written, waiting to find the person who needs it, because the alternative is the comfortable ground. And he cannot choose the comfortable ground. It is a cold morning in Turin. The city is beautiful in the particular way of northern Italian cities in winter, the arcaded streets keeping the pedestrians out of the wind, the light coming in at a low angle that makes the stone facades look warmer than they are, the smell of coffee from the cafes already open, the sound of horses on the cobblestones, the ordinary Tuesday morning activity of a city that does not know it is about to be the location of something. Friedrich leaves his rooms at the usual time. He is wearing his coat, the heavy one, the one he has been wearing for years, slightly too large now because he has lost weight again, the sleeves extending past his wrists in the way that clothing extends past the wrists of people who have become thinner than the clothing was made for. He walks the familiar route, past the cafe where he takes his breakfast, past the buildings whose facades he has been noticing for months with the particular intensity of someone whose eyesight is bad enough that what remains of vision becomes precious. Every clear image a small gift extracted from the general blur. He has been feeling in the weeks before this morning something that is difficult to describe and that the letters of December give only partial access to, an acceleration, a sense of things coming to a point. The grandiosity in the letters is part of it, but not all of it. There is also, in the letters of December 1888, a quality of clarity that is different from the clarity of the productive years, sharper and more exposed, like a wire that has had its insulation removed, conducting everything with a directness that is also a vulnerability. He turns a corner. There is a horse in the street. It is stopped in front of a building attached to a cab, and the cab driver is beating it. Not with the casual cruelty of someone who has stopped noticing what they are doing, but with the active, directed cruelty of someone who is angry at the horse for some failure of compliance, some refusal to move in the direction required, the whip coming down again and again on the animal's back, and the horse standing in the traces with its head dropped, not resisting, not moving, absorbing. Friedrich watches this for a moment. Then he crosses the street. He pushes through the small cluster of people who have stopped to watch. He reaches the horse. He throws his arms around its neck. He is weeping. The cab driver stops. The people watching stop. Friedrich is holding the horse's neck with both arms and weeping, in a way that is not the controlled grief of a man who has lost something, but the open, unguarded, total grief of someone in whom something has broken, in whom a barrier has given way that was not designed to give way, in whom the distance between the self and the world that makes daily functioning possible has suddenly, completely collapsed. The landlord is called. Friedrich is helped back to his rooms. He sits on a sofa. He does not speak coherently. Someone sends for a doctor. The doctor comes and examines him and says something cautious and non-committal, because what is happening is not yet clearly named, and the naming will take time, and by the time the naming has been completed, the person being named will no longer be present to receive the name. He does not recover. This is the fact that everything else must be understood in relation to. He does not have an episode and return to himself. He does not emerge from the breakdown with the clarity that sometimes follows crisis. He is, after that morning on the street in Turin, in a condition that the next 11 years will confirm is permanent. He will live until 1900. He will live with his mother in Naumburg, and then with his sister Elizabeth in Weimar, in the house she will make into a kind of Nietzsche shrine, arranging his presents for visiting admirers, managing his legacy with the particular combination of genuine love and catastrophic misunderstanding that has made Elizabeth. Forster Nietzsche, one of the most consequential figures in the history of philosophy's misreception. But the Friedrich who wrote the books is gone, not dead, gone. The body continues, the eyes open in the mornings, the food is eaten, the walks are taken, shorter now, supervised. Visitors come and sit with him, and he sometimes recognizes them and sometimes does not, and sometimes says things that are beside the point of any conversation being had. He is, by most accounts, not unhappy in these final years. He is somewhere that is not the place he was, somewhere quieter and more distant and without the urgency that characterized every year of his productive life. He dies in August 1900. He is 55 years old. What happened on the street in Turin has never been fully explained, and the honest answer is that it probably cannot be fully explained, not because the information is insufficient, but because the question of what breaks a mind is not a question that has clean answers even now, with all the diagnostic apparatus that the century following his death has produced. The physical explanations come first, because they are the most comfortable. The headaches, the failing eyesight, the progressive neurological deterioration that the symptoms of the previous 20 years seem to describe. There is a theory held by some medical historians that Friedrich had syphilis contracted during his brief military service, and that the breakdown of 1889 represents the tertiary stage of the disease reaching the brain. There is a counter-theory that the symptoms do not match syphilis, and that what he had was a hereditary cerebrovascular condition similar to what killed his father. There is a theory that the chloral hydrate he was taking to manage the insomnia was accumulating to toxic levels. There is no consensus. There is the breakdown and the 11 years of silence, and the body outlasting the mind, and the precise mechanism remains, appropriately for a philosopher who argued against the human need for clean explanations, unexplained. The psychological explanations are more interesting and more dangerous. More interesting because they connect the breakdown to the philosophy in ways that illuminate both, more dangerous because they risk becoming the kind of neat narrative that Friedrich himself would have recognized and rejected. The narrative that says, he flew too high, he thought too hard, he went too far into the territory that human minds are not designed to inhabit, and the going too far destroyed him. Friedrich would have rejected this narrative, not because it is entirely wrong, but because it is too comfortable, because it places the breakdown in the category of the tragic but comprehensible, the story of the genius consumed by his own gift, and this categorization serves the reader's need for the story to make sense more than it serves the truth of what happened. What happened is more specific and more ordinary than the myth of the genius destroyed by his own thought. What happened is that a man who had been living for 20 years in conditions of chronic physical suffering and profound isolation, who had been doing the daily work of saying yes to those conditions in practice and in print, who had been arguing with everything he had for the possibility of Amor Fati and the unconditional yes, reached the end of what was available to him, not the end of the philosophy, the end of the physical and neurological resources that made the philosophy possible. The body, which had been the obstacle and the companion and the proving ground for everything he believed, gave out. And in the giving out, in the final moment before the silence, on a street in Turin on a cold January morning, what broke through was not the madness, but the thing underneath the madness. The thing that had been there from the beginning, from the parsonage and the father's coffin and the boy who filed things away and did not cry where anyone could see. The thing underneath was this: he could not bear cruelty. He had never been able to bear cruelty. The entire philosophy, the death of God and the eternal recurrence, and Amor Fati and the will to power and the Übermensch, walking the tightrope over the abyss. All of it had been, at some level, an attempt to understand and answer the question of how a creature that cannot bear cruelty is supposed to live in a world that contains it in abundance, that produces it structurally, that inflicts it on the innocent without reason and without apology. He could not bear the horse being beaten, not on that morning and not in principle and not ever. This is not a contradiction of the philosophy, it is the heart of it. The person who argues most passionately for the unconditional yes is not the person who has made their peace with everything that generates the no. It is the person who feels the no most completely and has decided, in full knowledge of everything that decision costs, to say yes anyway. Not because the cruelty is acceptable, because the alternative to the yes is a life spent in the posture of the no, and the posture of the no is the last man's comfortable ground, and he cannot stand on the comfortable ground. He throws his arms around the horse's neck. This is not madness. This is the most coherent thing he has ever done. This is the philosophy in its most direct and most unguarded form, the barrier between the self and the world's suffering that makes daily functioning possible, the barrier that he had been arguing against philosophically for 20 years, the managed distance that he called bad faith and slave morality, and the last man's comfort, gone, the thing he was arguing for all along, the full presence, the unconditional yes, the amor fati that does not look away, arrived in the most literal and most devastating possible form. He is present, completely present. The horse's suffering lands in him with his own weight. There is no distance, there is no management. There is no philosophical framework positioning the suffering at the appropriate remove for safe contemplation. There is only this, a creature in pain, and another creature who cannot bear it, and the arms going around the neck. Whether this is the moment the mind breaks or the moment it arrives at what it was always moving toward, Friedrich would have refused to answer. The question assumes a clean distinction between the breakdown and the breakthrough that his philosophy does not permit. The eternal recurrence does not ask whether the moment is a good one or a bad one. It asks, would you say yes to it? Overbeck arrives from Basel. He finds Friedrich in his rooms, alternately weeping and singing and silent. He manages, with difficulty, to get him onto a train. Friedrich is sometimes lucid on the train and sometimes not. When he is lucid, he speaks of things he needs to do, letters to write, the next book, the work still remaining. When he is not lucid, he is in a place that Overbeck, who loves him, cannot follow. They arrive in Basel. A doctor examines Friedrich and recommends an asylum. He is admitted to the Basel asylum and then transferred to one in Jena and then released into the care of his mother in Naumburg and then, after his mother's death, into the care of Elizabeth. Elizabeth has returned from Paraguay, where she and her husband Bernhard Förster had been attempting to establish an Aryan colony called Nueva Germania. The colony has failed. Förster has killed himself. Elizabeth has come back to Germany and has discovered that her brother's reputation after years of obscurity is beginning to grow. The books are being read, the name is becoming known, people are coming to Naumburg to see him. Elizabeth understands immediately what this means and what it requires. She establishes the Nietzsche archive. She positions herself as the authoritative interpreter of her brother's work. She begins editing his unpublished notes, selecting, arranging, retitling, presenting the fragments in configurations that serve her own ideological purposes, her nationalism, her anti-Semitism, everything Friedrich had spent his productive life arguing against. The book she constructs from his notebooks and calls The Will to Power is not a book Friedrich wrote. It is a book Elizabeth assembled from fragments he had discarded or set aside, arranged to suggest a systematic philosophy of domination that is almost the precise opposite of what the actual books argue. It becomes, in the decades following his death, one of the most widely read versions of his thought. It is the version that reaches the Nazis. It is the version that makes his name available for uses that would have horrified him. This is the misappropriation, and it needs to be named clearly and briefly and then set aside, because dwelling on it too long does the same damage it is trying to undo. It turns Friedrich's work into a story about what it was misread as rather than what it actually is. The Nazis who claimed him had not read him. They had read Elizabeth's constructions. They had taken the Übermensch and the will to power and the death of God and stripped them of the context, the rented rooms, the headaches, the 33 unsold copies, the arms around the horse's neck, the context that is the philosophy. That is the only thing that makes the philosophy what it actually is, rather than what it can be made to look like in the wrong hands. What it actually is, stripped of the misreadings, is this: a philosophy built by a man who could not bear cruelty in conditions that provided daily evidence for the no, arguing with everything he had for the possibility of the yes. Not the yes of the person who has been given reasons, the yes of the person who has not been given reasons and is saying it anyway. The yes of the will to power, understood as self-overcoming rather than domination. The yes of Amor Fati, understood as practice rather than proclamation. The yes of the eternal recurrence, understood as a test of genuine presence rather than a cosmological theory. The yes of a man on a street in Turin in a coat that is slightly too large, weeping, with his arms around a horse's neck. The visitors come to Weimar in the 1890s. They are the readers who have finally found the books, the young people especially, the ones for whom the death of God is not a historical event, but the actual texture of their daily experience, the ones who have grown up in the ruins of the framework and are trying to figure out what to build in the rubble and have found in Friedrich's work the most honest account available of what the rubble is and what the building requires. They sit with him. He is sometimes present and sometimes not. When he is present, he is usually gentle, curious, occasionally funny in the dry, compressed way of the letters. He does not speak about the philosophy. He does not seem to be the philosopher in these moments. He is the man who was always there underneath the philosophy, the man who filed things away and did not cry where anyone could see and resisted Schopenhauer and left Bayreuth and kept walking in the mountains through the headaches. One visitor reports that Friedrich looked at him for a long time during a visit and then said, quietly and with apparent lucidity, "I have given them the most difficult gift." And then he was somewhere else again. The visitor did not know what to make of this. He wrote it down anyway, the most difficult gift, not the consolation, not the framework, not the replacement for what was lost. The question, the demon's question, offered without the answer, offered as the question itself, as the thing that must be faced and lived inside, and answered not in principle but in practice, not once but daily, not in the good conditions but especially in the bad ones. Would you say yes? Not to the idea of your life, to this, to exactly this, the body in the chair, by the window in Weimar, the visitors who come and sometimes find him present and sometimes do not, the books being read by people he will never meet, working on a question he has given them without the answer, because the answer cannot be given, can only be built by each person in their own rented rooms, on their own mountain walks, in their own conditions, through their own practice of the most difficult and most necessary thing he spent his life arguing for. The yes, not the easy yes, not the yes of someone who has been given reasons, the yes that costs everything and asks for nothing in return, the yes that is, in the end, the only honest response to the demon's question, to the removed horizon, to the unchained earth, to the life as it actually is in all its specific unrepeatable texture of difficulty and beauty and loss, and the occasional morning in the mountains when the light does something to the air and the world feels, briefly, completely, entirely worth saying yes to. He sits by the window, the books are being read, the question is alive. You already know the question. You have known it since before you started reading this. You have known it in the way you know things that live underneath the thinking, underneath the daily management of the hours and the obligations and the comfortable routines that make the not knowing possible. You have known it the way Friedrich knew it from the parsonage, filed away, accumulating, waiting for the moment when the conditions that make it possible to keep filing it away are finally removed. The demon does not arrive with drums, it does not announce itself. It arrives in the ordinary moments, the moments when the structure of the day has temporarily given way and you are briefly uncomfortably without the next thing to do. The gap between one activity and the next, the moment before sleep, when the carefully maintained distance between yourself and your own life suddenly closes and you are in it, completely in it, without the buffer of busyness or purpose, or the forward lean of wanting the next thing. In that moment, the demon speaks. This life as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more. And the question is not a philosophical question. It has never been a philosophical question. It is the question underneath the philosophy, the question the philosophy was built to help you face. It is the most personal question available, more personal than any question about God or meaning or the structure of the cosmos. It is about this, your specific life, the one you are actually living, not the one you're planning to live, or the one you tell people you're living, or the one you will live, once the current difficulties have resolved themselves into the configuration that finally merits full presence. This one, would you say yes? Friedrich spent 44 years building toward an honest answer to this question. Not a comfortable answer, not an answer that resolves the difficulty or removes the weight of it, or makes the saying of it easy, an honest one. And the honest answer, the one his life demonstrates rather than argues, is not yes, and it is not no. It is, I am working toward the yes. This is the answer that the rented rooms and the headaches and the mountain walks and the 33 unsold copies give us. Not the triumphant yes of someone who has arrived, the daily, unglamorous, entirely genuine movement toward the yes of someone who has not arrived and knows it and keeps moving anyway. The Amor Fati, not as achievement but as practice. The will to power not as domination, but as the refusal to let the conditions of your existence determine the quality of your response to it. The eternal recurrence not as a cosmological theory, but as the question you ask yourself in the gap between one day and the next. The question that tells you, more honestly than any self-assessment you could construct in the daylight, where you actually are. Not where you think you are, not where you present yourself as being, where you actually are. In the dark, when the demon speaks, when there is nobody watching and no performance required. Are you here? Are you actually here in this life, in this specific unrepeatable existence with its specific texture of difficulty and beauty and loss, and the occasional morning when the light does something to the air? Or are you somewhere slightly adjacent to it, managing it from a safe distance, present in the acceptable rooms and absent from the difficult ones, saying yes to the edited highlights and tolerating the rest, while you wait for the version of your life that you can say yes to completely? Friedrich cannot answer this for you. He knew he could not answer it for you. This is the most difficult gift, the question offered without the answer, because the answer cannot be given. It can only be built by you in your conditions, through your practice of the thing he spent his life arguing for and demonstrating and failing at and returning to and arguing for again. Let us go back to the beginning. Not the beginning of the philosophy, the beginning of the person. Recurrence, 1849. A small boy in a house full of women. The father's coffin carried out the door. The question filed away before it has a name. The gap between the faith in every room and the fact of what happened to the man who held the faith. The something underneath that will not be explained or consoled or resolved by any of the available frameworks. He spent his life with that something. He took it to Leipzig and found Schopenhauer, and felt the recognition of a man who has been carrying something unnamed and has finally found the word. He took it to Tribschen and sat with Wagner in the house above the lake, and felt for the first time that it might be possible to belong somewhere. He took it to Bayreuth and watched the man in the row ahead, receiving confirmation rather than confrontation, and felt the belonging give way, and took the train back to the rented rooms and sat with the question alone. He took it to Sils Maria and stood by the rock and felt the thought arrive. He took it to the desk and wrote it down. Wrong the first time and the second time and the third, getting closer with each iteration, finding with each book the more compressed and more honest formulation of the thing he was trying to say. He took it to the cafe in Turin and sat at his usual table and watched the people in the street with the attentiveness of someone for whom every clear image is a gift extracted from the general blur. He took it to the street where the horse was being beaten, and he could not bear it, and the arms went around the neck and the barrier gave way, and the years of managed distance collapsed into the most direct and most unguarded form of the thing he had been arguing for all along, full presence. The yes that does not look away, the Amor Fati that includes this, especially this, the difficulty and the cruelty, and the loss and the horse standing in the traces with its head dropped, absorbing. He is weeping on a cobblestone street in Turin, and this is not the failure of the philosophy. This is what the philosophy was always pointing toward, the person who cannot be protected from the world's suffering by the comfortable distance of the managed self. The person for whom the barrier has become thin enough that what happens on the other side of it lands with the weight of what happens on this side. The thinness is not madness, the thinness is the destination. He just arrived there in conditions that the destination, once arrived at, made unsurvivable. There is a mountain in the Swiss Engadine. Friedrich climbed its paths hundreds of times over the summers he spent at Sils Maria. The path above the lake, the one that leads to the pyramidal rock where the thought arrived, the specific quality of the air at 6,000 feet, the mountains on the far shore of the lake, the light in August doing something to the world that makes the world feel, for the duration of the doing of it, completely real. He is not there anymore. He has not been there since 1888. The summers at Sils Maria are over. The mountain walks are over. The notebooks are filling with something other than philosophy now, with the grandiose declarations of December, and then with nothing, with the silence that will last 11 years. But the path is still there, the rock is still there, the lake is still there, doing what it does in August, the light on the water, the mountains on the far shore, the particular quality of the air that makes the world feel real. And the question is still there, not in Friedrich, in you. It was always going to end up here, in you, because this is where Friedrich always intended it to end up. He was not writing for the readers of his own time, who mostly did not read him. He was writing for the people who would come after, the people for whom the death of God is not a historical event to be argued about philosophically, but the actual texture of daily experience, the people who have grown up without the framework, without the horizon, in the ruins of the structure that once held everything together, trying to figure out what to build in the rubble. He was writing for you, not with consolation, not with a replacement framework, not with a new set of answers to hand you in place of the old ones, with the question, the most difficult gift, the question that cuts through every comfortable self-narrative to the thing underneath, the question that the philosophy was built to help you face honestly, rather than manage from a safe distance. Would you say yes? Not yes to the idea of your life, yes to this, to the specific thing you most want to be different, to the loss that has not healed and may not heal, to the work that has not found its audience and may not find it, to the version of yourself you have not yet managed to become and may not become, to the Tuesday mornings and the ordinary difficulties and the unremarkable texture of a day that contains nothing dramatic and nothing obviously meaningful and nothing that would make it, from the outside, look like a day worth choosing infinitely, to the waiting, to the not yet, to the gap between the life you're living and the life you're planning to live when things improve, to all of it. The hourglass turns, you're here again, everything you love and everything you want to be different, woven together, inseparable, the fabric of the one life you actually have rather than the two lives, the acceptable one and the one you're tolerating, that most people spend their existence trying to maintain the distinction between. The demon waits. And Friedrich, in the Turin street, in the rented rooms, on the mountain paths, in the notebooks filled, in the large compressed letters that nobody could quite read, is not telling you what to answer. He is not capable of telling you what to answer. The answer is yours. It has always been yours. It is the one thing that cannot be given or borrowed or inherited or argued into existence. It has to be built by you, in your conditions, through your practice of the most demanding and most necessary thing he spent his life trying to describe. The yes that is not performed, the yes that is not contingent, the yes that does not wait for the reasons to arrive before it commits, the yes that includes the no it has moved through, the yes that is not the end of the difficulty, but the transformation of your relationship to it, the yes that is in the end not a philosophical position, but a way of being in your own existence. A way of being here, actually here in this, with this, as this, without the escape hatch of the better life waiting just past the current insufficiency. The yes that costs everything, the yes that asks for nothing in return. He was 5 years old when the question began. He was 44 when the body gave out. Between those 2 points, in the rented rooms and the mountain walks and the books written in conditions that justified not writing them, and the 33 unsold copies and the arms around the horse's neck, he was doing the only thing he knew how to do. He was working toward the yes, not the triumphant yes, not the yes of someone who has overcome the difficulty and is speaking from the other side of it. The daily yes, the yes in progress, the yes that has to be renewed every morning in the specific conditions of the specific day, the yes that does not accumulate into a permanent state, but has to be chosen again and again in the moments when the choosing is hardest. This is what he left, not a system, not a replacement for what was lost, not the answers to the questions the death of God made unavoidable, the practice, the direction, the example of a life that kept moving toward the yes through everything that generated the no. Not because the no was wrong, not because the difficulty was secretly good, not because the universe was, underneath its apparent indifference, actually on his side, because the alternative was the comfortable ground, and he could not choose the comfortable ground. And you, reading this, knowing the question is now in you, and has been in you since before you started reading, knowing the demon's voice and the hourglass and the everything woven together inseparably, the joy and the woe chained together, the specific Tuesday morning that is the eternal Tuesday morning, you have to decide whether you can choose it either. The comfortable ground is right there. It is warm. It is safe. The last man lives there and is content and has made the rational calculation and is not wrong exactly, is not making an error you can easily identify and correct, is simply choosing the safety of the managed distance over the exposure of the full presence, the tolerable life over the chosen one, the waiting over the being here. You can stand there, or you can walk out to the edge of something. A rock above a lake in the mountains, a rented room with a desk and a window and the paper waiting, a street in a city where the ordinary morning activity of a city that does not know it is about to be the location of something is happening around you. The smell of coffee, the sound of hooves on cobblestones, the particular quality of the light at this hour, doing something to the world that it does not always do, making it feel, for the duration of the doing of it, completely real. You can stand there and let the thought arrive, not as a philosophical position, as the actual situation, the actual ground under your actual feet in your actual life, the hourglass, the return, the everything you love and everything you want to be different, woven together, the fabric you're standing in. The demon leans down. The question is in the air between you. Friedrich is not here. He is in the Turin street and the Sils Maria path and the rented rooms and the desk and the 33 unsold copies and the arms around the horse's neck. He is in the books that found no readers and then found you. He is in the question he gave you without the answer, because the answer was always yours. He is in the practice, the daily, unglamorous, entirely genuine practice of moving toward the yes, not arriving, moving toward one more morning, one more desk, one more page, one more mountain walk in the specific light of the specific day that is also the eternal day, the day that returns, the day you're in right now. Reading this, feeling the question settle into you the way Friedrich felt it settled by the rock, like something geological, like something that has always been true and has just now, in this moment, become visible. The hourglass turns. You are here. The demon waits. What do you say?